Hello, everyone. This is Francis, Martin, and Curt Doolittle for the Francis Institute. No, for the Natural Law Institute. Sometimes it feels like it's the Francis Institute because he's sort of the boss around here. But for the Natural Law Institute, today is Friday, February 21st. First, it's our Q&A session which we call office hours, where you write in your questions and we respond. There's usually a backlog, so it happens a little more slowly than you might like, but we actually like the backlog because we know we have material for the next meeting.
At least the next month, judging by the look of it, because I realized today we'll be answering questions from early January.
Okay, so yeah, exactly. So normally what happens, Francis reads the questions, Martin reads his answers. Martin's usually correct, except for today.
We'll see about that.
I think you're just testing to see if he's paying attention.
I love Martin. I have to tease him. It's part of the job. Part of my job satisfaction. Anyway, Martin answers the question, and I add depth and color. So right now I'm going to get up and go get my coffee out of the microwave. And
good, because I can answer this first one.
Yes, because I don't know the answer.
Yeah. All right, so question 1. Is anyone monitoring the email account for naturalawinstitute.org onboarding message? I filled out the SMART form and haven't heard back. Is this an initiative that's still up and running? It's hard to say whether it's hard to give a yes or no answer. So this is normally something that Brandon, our president, looks into, and I need to check with him on if anyone's looking at this. Sorry, I should have known better, but I have pinged Brandon and forgot to remind him.
Well, he suggested if you need a specific response, then to write an email and not just fill out a form.
Is that his latest? Okay, I did not see that response from him. All right.
Might have been in my DMs.
So is there an answer or no?
Apparently, Martin had one that I missed. And normally we use the email collected on this form to announce our conferences and major updates from the Institute. So maybe it does not specifically have any outreach associated this time, but there will be once we announce our next conference.
We have the same one for the Property and Freedom Society, and very little goes out on that. It's just whatever the conference is, who's going to be attending, when it is, a reminder for it, and the occasional public appearance of Hans Hop somewhere. Mises sends more emails, but they've learned that less is more.
Because everybody gets too much email these days.
And they'll just start ignoring it. So you have to make it, something they get something out of.
All right. Moving on to question 2. It's a question for Martin and Curt. I estimate the regular Twitter debates between both of you capture the ancient conflict of Anglo versus continental perspectives.
Correct.
To stereotypical heights. But oftentimes it ends up with one side or both exhausting the other and pick up the role another day. I sense there are blind spots or assumptions that both of you are working off of. That doesn't seem
Martin
to be
just
coming
doesn't
through.
realize I'm right. Wait, I got to interject. Martin just doesn't realize I'm right yet.
Is that your way of saying, like, Martin should live another 30 years and then he'll get it?
Oh, it means what I think. Go ahead. We'll get into it when I'm here. I'm just asking with him because I know this subject's important to him. Go ahead.
Both you're working off of doesn't seem to come through in interpretations. That being said, Martin, can you list out blind spots or errors in Anglo worldview thinking? Curt, can you list out the blind spots or errors in continental worldview thinking? For the sake of argument, continental means Germanic, Central European.
I actually appreciate these disagreements because over time they allow me to pin down exactly what my problem is. As, like Rurik said in his article on friendship, Curt is perfectly channeling the Anglo oversoul. First, the Anglo worldview is universalistic, and I've yet to see a universalistic ideology that is anything but a moral license to impose your preferences on the world and feeling good about yourself for doing it. We're talking about an Anglo version of Tikkun Olam, you could say. As to what is being imposed, it's mercantilism, supported by economic ideology that revolves around increasing merchant profits, decreasing the price of labor, increasing efficiency, all that stuff, with total disregard of what's actually good for and desired by nations. Social cohesion, national unity, sovereignty, all of those have to be undermined such that everyone cares as little about their co-ethnics as Anglos do, and nothing prevents merchants from accessing every market with minimal costs, from privatizing commons and socializing losses. The regime promoted everywhere is the so-called liberal democracy, which is a contradiction in terms and actually neither liberal nor democratic, but a nominal rule by oligarchs that are easily bought off and whose interests are entirely divergent from those of the people they pretend to represent. All this is morally justified by something called human rights, which are not actually rights but privileges granted to the low, such as criminals, parasites, degenerates, foreigners, and unmarried women, to undermine the normal, middle, and working class people with healthy moral pro-social instincts, which is a part of how we got civil rights and wokeness too. And with people getting access to hyperconsumption of all sorts of cheap slop of horrible quality, even as wages everywhere go down to the lowest common global denominator. Libertarians call this process an increase in standard of living, which they support by misapplied free trade concept from Ricardo that, while wrong to begin with due to the usual problem of massiness, at least assumed immobility of labor and capital, something they ignore entirely because they use individuals without regard for the background in their math instead of families, communities, and nations tied to a particular land and particular tradition. All of this, of course, also applies to globalist Jews, but all this stuff is what the two groups have been united on, except Jews maintain nepotism for themselves and thus end up the winners of all this. I'll also try to get ahead of what Curt seems to think I'm not accounting for, accusing me of some form of libertarianism. The argument being everyone is free-riding on world trade that America is policing, if largely for the benefit of its own merchant class, and that I expect this to just continue without investment. But I simply don't care if it does. If the world trade comes at the cost of everything I outline above, then I'm happy for world trade to die and I will spit on its grave. Instead, anyone who wants to trade, let him pay for guarding his own trade routes instead of subverting everyone for the benefit of a few. I furthermore see no issue with protectionist trade networks forming, be it as empires, federations, or Reichs, because despite denial, the alternative is evidently a global empire. Curt sometimes speaks positively about nationalism, but it's my impression he only means this as an ideology that would give people mindfulness, produce and maintain commons, have children. Whereas to me, as should be clear now, nationalism implies a completely different political program that actually puts the interests of the nation first, merchants be damned, and considerations of foreigners only made insofar interaction with them will affect the natives.
Yeah, this is better every time I read it. I would say that um, there's a lot of truth in there. The problem would be in two of the premises. The first premise is that it isn't in everyone's interest to have economic growth, and that we've made by our kind of globalism, we've made economic growth possible. However, we had in the post-war order, they didn't. In the post-war order, it was that order was meant to defeat the communists, so they spun the message as human rights, democracy, and borders, right? To prevent the reemergence of empires that had led to the conflicts of the past. So, and so they, in talking about these things, they created this myth of freedom, democracy, prosperity, which was readily captured by the what we call the progressive left, and it was successfully captured and across all our institutions to criticize not the economics that had come from it, but the fact that the control over, but the property rights that emerged from it, and thus the influence of people with money over the government at times, and certainly over the people. So in other words, Martin's right on most of those counts. I disagree that people don't want this world order. The only people who don't want this world order are the remaining empires. Now, because if we were to take this world order away, everybody's going to get hot shit poorer and rebel against it. So I don't buy that. What I buy, and this is the root of the argument, is that I buy that the post-war messaging to defeat the Soviets and the Chinese communists, it was spun in a way that was somewhere between pragmatic and dishonest, and in doing so opened the door for and did not suppress all the previous populist movements, which were of course leftist. So that leftism has run its course. Communism failed quite early. Socialism failed by the 70s. And we're now seeing the end of feminism and progressivism, feminism and cultural Marxism. And I don't know what postmodernism will see. That seems like it might have legs. So I don't. What I feel like Martin does when he makes this argument is conflate things that are related because of past policy decisions, but are not intrinsic to the problem I'm trying to solve, and by proxy the Institute, which is how do we have the good without the bad? In order to do that, we have to modify the law to prohibit the bad. That includes one of the most important things Martin mentioned, which is this fucking mercantilism. So the way I just position this is that capitalism, as when people use the term, does not mean under rule of law of natural law. It means everything that Martin lists in there, especially the privatization of commons, the socialization of losses. Whereas, as we know, the Nazis were not tolerant of that whatsoever, and they were correct. And that we should not be tolerant of it either. So, I mean, even Trump is sort of basically taking on my sort of argument, which is that if it's not fair, it's not fair. And if it internalizes costs of others, or externalizes, others are allowed to externalize their costs into our society, then it's not natural law common natural law
does not conform to natural law.
Does not conform to natural law, and it doesn't conform to common law, and it doesn't at all. So France is actually much better at this. France is very good at this, by the way. So my view is that is that I understand what Martin's saying, but I don't understand why these things have to be conflated when the work we're pursuing is meant to stop it. Well, in other words, it should prevent the bad riding on the good. If you want to say that prosperity, borders, and rights are, I'm not so sure about human rights, as you know. Property and borders, or sovereignty, borders, and property is the right order. I don't see anybody that has the good of anybody else at heart uh, uh, needing to violate those principles and create wars. I just don't see that. I don't understand any argument. I don't think there is any argument against it. If you want to say, if you want to look at a science of government and say we can produce a government we want under natural law, we can produce any government we want that does not provoke hostility of our neighbors, we can do that. So my problem all along is I believe the attempt to create a narrative that all of these things are bad and some of these things are good. Excuse me, all of these are bad, when the fact is that some of these things are bad and some of these things are very good, and we aren't exactly prescient as humans about the long-term consequences of our ideas. So we're currently killing off at right now both the post-war institution and its opposition that survived the world wars and expanded during the post-war era. I think both of those are dying off. What we're going to see in the future, well, I would like it to be uh, something that satisfied both the continentals and the navals, right? Not NAVAL, right? Right, the seafaring people, the island people, the
Or
anglo,
continent-sized island people.
right, versus well, I mean, the rest of the island cultures, America, Canada, UK, New Zealand, and Australia. I mean, they dominate their islands, right? I mean, there's nobody competition. But once you have borders, you have a much more complicated problem, especially if you look at France. It's divided diagonally from the northeast to the southwest, right? A lot of France is Germany. It should be German, right? I don't know if they want to be German or not, but they probably want. But that land should be there. So there's conflict over that. So all these remaining border disputes are still open because we haven't given people the choices to moderate them to determine what they want. Um, but and I would think that would be something that would be possible to happen. But how you can also bring in, like the Germans have in particular, all these goddamn immigrants who are hostile. I mean, Islam is hostile to the West. We can't have it. There's no choice. So we're going to see some reversal on those areas. I would suspect at the current rate, we're going to see the same problem with the Jews again, is that the people are going to get enough transparency to rebel against them, causing at least some sort of issue there. So I don't agree that the Anglo objective of a system of decidability is that grants most people sovereignty and prosperity is other than the most moral ambition we've had.
You cannot grant sovereignty, you have to take it. If it's granted, you don't have it.
You don't grant it, you ensure it. So for people, so my argument with, and again, let's say your country, because I've had to study it enough to understand it, it benefits tremendously from the trade, being part of the trade bloc in Europe, but its culture is undermined by the northern European nonsense that has been so successfully destructive both in America and there. So I agree with all that. On the other hand, you can't have sovereignty without a force necessary to compel all challengers.
Which I agree with. Czechia is too small to have sovereignty. There's no way around it.
No, it can have it if it has insurers. So
If it needs external insurers, it doesn't have sovereignty.
you mean the terms? They're probably right. The terms of you're saying that the terms of obtaining, I don't know what other word to use, self-determination, are limited by the terms of the contract for sovereignty. Right.
The key in self-determination, the key part is self.
Say again?
The key part in self-determination is self.
Well,
If somebody else is insuring, then somebody else is determining.
Right. So what you're saying is that the terms of insurance are more expansive than the minimum necessary for reciprocal insurance, because you're saying that federation comes with strings attached.
I'm saying Czechia obviously needs to be a part of a bigger bloc that perhaps can be sovereign, because it can defend itself.
So I agree, and so why not a federation?
Why not?
That's okay. That's where we got to. That's all I was arguing. My whole point was that you can't have you had a more subtle point that was correct, and my whole point was simply says you can't have sovereignty in fact if you don't have the power to forbid all competitors for your territory. But
yes,
okay. So then the only thing is whether rule of law by the natural law, and I don't mean. Hold on a second. I think I got it. So rule of law, the natural law is great if it's ethnocentric. The question is if you don't have ethnocentric, in other words, ethnocentric priorities, then you can have the problem of the gradual intrusion of Islam or Jewish, at least Jewish behavior. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't prioritize any foreigners, even other Europeans.
Well, it puts my issue is that I'll prioritize every intellectual in the world that will come, which is a small number, because it does us so much good. But
provided all the externalities are accounted for.
Correct.
I think a typical intellectual does more harm than good.
Depends on which kind of intellectual.
Yeah, exactly.
A typical one
has a capability of doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
Just like nuclear weapons.
You can it's pretty hard when you look at all the East Asian names in all the research papers on LLMs to say that there's no value in those people. I mean, we may have to make sure that integration happens, but I wouldn't want to be without them. So if we can recruit them, fine. But that's a choice for America to make because of its position as trying to maintain scientific and commercial advantage. But I wouldn't say everybody needed to take that advantage. So I'm going to say that I don't know. I think, what did I say? Did I say anything else in here other than you're a genius? Yeah. So I think I handled it better with what I said here. So yeah, if we agree on the federation as a means of sovereignty and the priority of ethnicity and the what was the third point? And the variability of policy under natural law to suit the local interests, then I'm going to agree with you. Does it hurt to make me admit that you're right again?
I expected it. Yeah, I want some sort of federation because, like I said, Czechia cannot be sovereign. I'd just much rather it be something local,
Yeah,
federation.
what came out of this conversation is three distinct criteria that are important, right? The three criteria that are important for disallowing the bullshit that happens, right? That's the deceit, the cultural corruption that's been riding on this. We have to prosecute those people. We have to criminalize it, and we have to make it constitutionally criminal. Otherwise, they're going to it's basically invasion and religious conversion.
It's our version of the false promise.
Yes, it's fucking horrible. And I go back and I go back and put myself in the shoes of the people who created Bretton Woods and all those decisions, and I'm like, well, that was at the time it was a very moral thing to do. It was, but it certainly was done. It certainly opened the door worldwide for the expansion of the very bullshit they'd gone to war over in the first place.
So may I interject something, since I've been basically monitoring this exchange for the better part of last year or so, because this question keeps on coming up. I think that at the root of this question between your 2 point of views is whether the bad naturally comes with the good, meaning the bad of, how did Martin put it, mercantilism and essentially Jewish writing on top of this global trade. Whether that's essentially whether you cannot separate the two. And I think, Martin, your point is that was the island nation strategy of promoting trade and so on. These bad naturally will come with it. And I think, Curt, your point is that it's not so necessary the bad has to come with it. It's just that up until now, we did not have the technology and the means to discern, to take full account, and therefore prevent the bad.
Yeah, because I'm not, I don't, when I look back, I don't try to do, I do things like, boy, you were dumb, or that was oversight, or whatever, but people don't know what we know today, right? I mean, so that's, you're right. I mean, I look at people, and if their motives were pure, right, so to speak, or at least reasonable, I can understand it. And they felt like communism was a threat to human.
I would, okay, let me interrupt you for a second. Just like when making judgments, we look at the consequences, we look at the results, and not so much of the intention. Because intention, that's part of morality. But as judges, we need to look at what harm is actually done and find restitution, right?
There's restitution and there's punishment. In the case of making an error, right, which is what you would class ignorance error, right, or bias, then you need restitution. In the case of intention, then you need punishment.
Correct.
Right, and so it's a tort, right? It's a tort either way, but is it a tort that requires restitution or one that requires punishment as well? Because the three tests of the law are restitution, prevention, punishment, and prevention. All right. So did we kill this one? Because that was a really good.
Oh, I have some responses.
Oh wait, I'm sorry. I meant to say I saw you wanted to respond there, Martin. So go ahead.
In response to Francis, yes, I would say all the incentives point to mercantilism, and I would like to see the corrupt merchant elites we have now replaced once again with military elites who don't view their countries as economic zones, but a nation as an army that they have to make stronger and not exploit for profit. And also about Cold War, communism was never viewed as the primary enemy. Stalinism was, but not because it was communism, but because of Iron Curtain, because it was a problem for the globalist project. Trotskyism was just fine. Liberals from the West and communists often actually united on fighting the remainders of the old world order, of aristocracies, of nationalists, fascists. These were the real problems for them. That's all I have.
Yeah, I agree with you. So what I got out of that, which is probably true, is that whatever political effort is put behind these influences internationally, maybe even domestically, opportunities are created, both positive and negative, and there's always an institutional lag against in a lag in preventing the negative. And in this case, the negative was the negative, which is the female means of whatever, is turns out to be really dangerous and really subtle, and we lack the law to protect against it.
Law is one thing, but we also need elites that actually would want to prevent it.
Yes. And we replaced those elites with the elites that didn't want to prevent it.
Yeah, that takes regime change. We can't keep up this mercantilism.
So I'll go back to, it's our job to put into, because law is the means of human engineering that we have today. It's to put laws in place that create opportunity for people to basically profit from the capture of those, the capture, restitution and punishment and prevention of those who do all the crimes that you've so thoroughly enumerated. I agree. Will there always be a lag? Absolutely. My argument is I can't see that not trying to do this is, we could take the Chinese system and build a wall, so to speak, and
but then under that wall, and also the wall, the first island chain around China grew weak and stagnant. And this is one of the points I've been trying to make, is we humans became a dominant species on this earth because our unique ability to form ever larger cooperation blocks.
Yes.
When you block, take for example, look at Japan, right? Japan, again, island nation, they, after their warring period, until the middle of 1800s when Comte Perry opened their doors forcefully through naval vessels, they were a perfectly autarkic community.
Mm-hmm.
They even they basically banned all kinds of foreign trade, and it went stagnant for 300 something odd sort of years. At the end of the warring period, the Sengoku period, I think it's 1600 something, Japanese, just take one example, right? Mm-hmm. Japan actually had the most advanced muskets on Earth because their metalsmiths was able to take Western technology, in this case, introduced in Japan, muskets introduced in Japan by Portuguese traders. They were able to take that to the peak of technology at the time. And then they united the country. The samurai class decided, well, in this case, the warrior aristocracy decided, well, we no longer need these things because real men fight with swords. And so, fast forward 300 years, Comte Perry sailed into Tokyo Bay with gunships, and the samurais have nothing to answer. But then you got to give the Japanese credit, because in the next 20, 30 years or so, they decided, hey, this is not the way to go, and we're going to industrialize. And within one human lifetime, they were able to fight the superpower at the time.
But then you can't ignore that they successfully industrialized so much after the war because they protected their industries from trade.
They protected their industries, but it's not the same thing as saying they can do it being autarkic. They had to, so in this case, they industrialized by forming collaborative systems with foreign nations. And you could say that, well, it's mercantilism or whatever, but they did form some kind of trade relationship with the rest of the world that helped them to industrialize. They could not have done it themselves.
Sure, and there are always costs and benefits, even to size, and it's always going to be a balancing act, and there will never be one answer for everything.
Then we're in agreement.
Okay.
I'm reading.
I want you to revel more publicly in winning, Martin. You have to show more joy. We'll go to Burger King and get one of those little crowns and paint off the Burger King logo and send it over for the Martin can wear it. See, this is the virtue of persistence. And so people look at us, they don't understand why we're doing this. But I know, given our past working together, we will come to the fucking answer. The problem is you have to have faith that the two of you will come to the answer. So I have faith we'll get there. Mostly because Martin's even more stubborn than I am. Look, he doesn't make a face or anything. He just sits there and says nothing. Martin, you take the joy out of this.
I maintain mystery.
Curt, have you seen Martin's interview? It's now on YouTube. His interview with, I want to say, Moritz. He's in Moritz's interview where Martin is in his aviator shades.
No, was this on our channel?
Yeah, of course it's on our channel. I published several weeks ago. This is the first. Well, this was the interview right after yours and Brendan's interview. Anyways, take a look. There's not a whole lot of his scenes because he didn't talk very much. Like he was just sitting there chilling in his aviator shades.
I don't
look like a king. It is there. Look for it.
Oh, Moritz and Martin.
Yes.
Oh, it's where Martin's trying to look like that. Oh God, what is his name? The Slavic guy who just got arrested and got out and it's all Manus Fury.
Tate?
No. The red pill guy.
Andrew Tate. That's
the Tate. Yes, you gotta Tate.
I don't think there's anything Slavic there, but
what? You look pretty. You look pretty good in this video, Martin.
Thanks.
Oh, that actually reminded me. Martin, you wanted some pictures of yourself, and I'll grab one of the stills. I think that's a good one.
Okay, maybe sort it out after office hours.
Okay.
Maybe what?
I didn't say I'm going to do it now. I just remembered my promise.
Okay.
Yeah, you absolutely, definitely fit in with the Tate brothers.
You're not even the first ones to tell me.
I doubt that I'm the first one to tell you that, but it's just I gotta make something of it. All right, what are we doing next?
Question 3. I have been thinking through your ideas on Indo-European cultural evolution.
All right, go ahead.
And how truth, reciprocity, and voluntary cooperation are core traits of Indo-European peoples. However, I see a potential issue that may require refinement. There were 2 waves of Indo-European migrations. The first wave, the Indo-Aryans, Iranians, Hittites, formed hierarchical, priest-led societies that became caste-based and ritualistic. The second wave, Celts, Germans, Slavs retained tribal, egalitarian warrior cultures, and with reciprocity and honor-based justice applied at all levels of society. The Bronze Age collapse seems to be a key variable in this divergence. First wave societies, which integrated into Bronze Age palace systems, became rigid and hierarchical, prioritizing religious authority and ritual conformity. In contrast, second wave societies emerging after the collapse retained tribal structures and consensus based governance, emphasizing personal responsibility and voluntary cooperation. You might argue that natural law existed among first wave elites, but even they moved toward hierarchical control. The second wave seems to be the true carrier of natural law principles, applying them more broadly and pragmatically. If both waves share steppe origins, why did they diverge so drastically? Is steppe ancestry its true first principle?
This is such a good question. I can read from my answer this time, can I? It's an excellent question. The difference is, whom did these groups encounter as they expanded and migrated? The Western expansion into the Europe ran into the younger, less developed, and less institutionalized European agrarian civilizations that were, by comparison, relatively homogeneous and peaceful. Relatively is the term there. Whereas the southern and eastern expansion into the old world and flood river valleys and irrigation with their flood river valleys with their irrigation, and had established priesthoods and empires. Both westward and eastward groups adapted their original pastoralist group strategy for conquest of or conflict with different peoples at different stages of development. Each political, especially political development. So all you're seeing is, and the person who wrote the question is correct, is the adaptation necessary to rule the conquered on the terms of the conquered. Secondly, I would suggest you are misinterpreting the meaning of priesthood. The Indo-Europeans used both customary law, which is precise, and religion, imprecise, in defense of sovereignty of the individual family, clan, and tribe. So it was an anti-power structure by both the religious and the law. So look up Dumazel's trifunctionalism, which is what I work with. This division of labor between religion, which is the intangible forces, and versus the law, which is tangible humans, is, as far as I know, unique in the world, and as I've described elsewhere, the product of that causality I just mentioned. So, in your question, is it true that it's before and after the Bronze Age collapse? It's more of the Bronze Age collapse made, which they probably created when they moved southward into Europe, into southern Europe from northern Europe. I suspect that they caused the Bronze Age collapse, but that it still remained that spreading westward into Europe and east and southward into Eurasia, they were encountering vastly different peoples. And whereas in the West, they were successful at basically demographically replacing them, or at least taking the women, it looks like children too, women and children, but killing the men. This is basically a genocide of the European male population. And so what you end up with is a very powerful group who can use relatively small numbers to deal with gaining control over agrarians who lacked the flood river valley that allowed for industrial levels of food production. And so you had a more distributed, just as you'd started out with sovereignty and a distributed political leadership and the steppe, it manifested quite successfully as they spread west, as maintaining the basic structure of their polity. As they moved east, for two things happen, of course. The genetic composition of the people dilutes and becomes the Indo-European invasion becomes as much a cultural invasion as it is as it was a genetic invasion. And as we get into India, they're encountering a culture that's been around a long time. I didn't even know the core of India had collapsed by now, which is the Indus River.
Was it the Magyars? Whatever the name
I
was.
don't want to get into names because I'm not sure I won't get them wrong. Uh, but when they went into northern, they found an incredibly disorganized society, and they used because that society was heavily very different from them. So the steppe people going to Europe, there's not much of an IQ difference, if any. We're not even sure which direction the IQ moves. But if you get over into India, I mean, there's a higher IQ demographic and a much lower demographic IQ. And so they have to develop some system. And they couldn't develop one based on egalitarianism because the great diversity of the people there. So they divided everybody into classes and gave them a duty, just like we divide people in military into ranks and gave them their duty. And they ran it. They took the military order and made it a class order, and it worked pretty well for them. When they got into the south, they got into Persia. That worked pretty well. Persia took a much more classical Middle Eastern strategy, which was to have to be the dominant conquering force in creating an empire because there were river valleys there with industrial levels of food production and easy transport and trade of it. So when you get down to the Persians, they're incredibly successful, but again, they have to modify with their behavior to suit the people, suit ruling the people that they had. The interesting part is, why are these Indo-Europeans so successful at maintaining group cohesion, where the Middle East never did? That's actually the fascinating part of it, is that because there were so many, a constantly rotating set of conquerors in the Middle East, each of which is almost a bit more of an asshole than the last, you end up with people not buying into whatever the political structure is because there's no use to it. There's no use to doing so. So they more heavily buy into the religious structure, the family structure, and even less so the community structure. So yeah, your observation and your question is correct. And I want to emphasize you can't think of Indo-Europe priesthood. I mean, it's the same problem with Nordic stuff or Germanic stuff. Our view of what religion means is through this Christian lens. It's not the same at all, and so we tend to project backward into these times the meaning of a priest when they're not that influential on a lot of things. They're sort of like anyway, I don't want to go into this thing, but you can't look at the priests of the period or even call them priests like we do today, like we think of today, and we tend to do that all the time. So if you want to think of it, the trifunctional system, you really have the chieftains or the military leadership, and they're moderated by the priests, which are the intangible, uncertain, and the law, which is a tangible and certain. And so you have this ternary system, but and the reason, of course, is that because everybody's a warrior, there's no way to separate the warrior class from the rest, right? Because they're drawing from the entirety of the population. And so if the population's bought into all three, right, the three form a regulatory system preventing the capture of sovereignty by anyone and preserving the sovereignty of the individuals, or at least the clans. So yeah, those are my two bits of feedback on that. Was an excellent question.
Originally, so the family patriarch would be family priest, right?
Yes, correct.
We know distinction.
It's because it's more about doing rituals, right?
Ritual to placate the unseen forces.
Correct. It's more about ritual.
It was about ancestors back then, before those became gods.
I
Yes.
think not. Well, I guess again, I'm thinking back in Chinese history. It's ancestors, but also the concept of heaven, which is essentially beyond human forces.
Okay, I'm talking about Indo-European specifically.
Okay.
It may not apply to Chinese. We lost you, Francis. Okay.
His camera automatically resets. It's like a special ed kid. It needs positive reinforcement to stay awake.
Just a nitpick about the term natural law. We use it descriptively, not prescriptively, and any strategy that has demonstrably worked could be made compatible with it.
Yes.
Uh,
It's just the thing about the ternary system is it forms a market for the continuous preservation of the agency of the individuals, and it only and so that's where the magic sort of comes in, because once you institutionalize that, it becomes metaphysics. You don't anyway. So what's next? Go ahead. Am I trying? I don't want to.
The question is, what results are we looking for, right? And usually when we speak about European strategy, then we're concerned with rapid adaptation, which other strategies have lacked.
Yes.
Well, I guess going back to the person's original question, if both waves share step origins, why do they diverge so drastically? And you answer that. Is step ancestry the true first principle? What about answer to that question? I suppose it's no.
Are we? Is there a question there?
I mean, then we have to consider Mongolians as well.
I was gonna go there because Curt, while you were answering this question, I thought of a similar episode of steppe ancestry invading lands that have pre-existing people, right? And this is Mongolian invasion, and a follow-up a few hundred years later by the Manchurian invasion. Both are considered barbarian groups, and both had to formulate strategies to rule the conquered people.
That's right.
The Mongolian answer is we're going to kill as many as we can and essentially rule them like livestock. And the Mongolian Empire didn't last very long.
I mean, I think if Mongols had a chance to settle in Europe, then their evolutionary path might have fled in a very similar direction as us, but Europe was already occupied. They just ruled it for a while. They never populated it.
Currently, in Devolve, it's 41 degrees Fahrenheit with cloudy skies.
What are we doing?
I guess that's a conclusion of this question.
Yes.
Okay,
all right.
Anyways, question 4. Hello. Why, where? Oh. Why the article section of CurtDoolittle.com taken down? They were a great help.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The CurtDoolittle.com was started by a fan, wonderful guy, who was no longer able to maintain it for various reasons, and so he transferred the domain to me, and I've begun modifying it. But because of the business interests we're working on consuming so much of my time, I'm behind in updating the main site, the Curt Doolittle site, as well as the business sites. Because these fucking people keep me busy. What can I tell you? Francis was a slave driver.
I offered more than once. We can cut back on extracurricular activities. And you said no every time.
Anyway, so I'm just joking. It is keeping me very busy. So I have control over the site, and I know what I'm going to do with it, because I have to address both the work at NLI and I have to address the commercial work I've done in order to help us get out of the future what we want, because we have a branding issue we're trying to produce. The content's all there, and you can't even search for it, which I don't know why you couldn't search for it. I might have taken down one of the links that went to the search, but that's just a mistake. It's all there. What I'm trying to do is move all the content from the NLI site over to the Curt Doolittle's, not all the content, all that historical content. I'm not even sure I should do that. What I'm really thinking of, people are going to go back into the old stuff I wore, and any of us in the Institute, we're going to know that most of the time I'm playing a King of the Hill game, all right, or I'm trying to explore something that's a taboo or whatever. And so I'm afraid that that's going to affect us in the future. So I want to put that stuff into an archive. The question is whether I just save it all as an archive, in other words, put it all into a website that's an archive, or whether I save it all into something offline and then move only the decent stuff over into the good stuff over into what's visible at curtdoolittle.com. I actually don't know the answer, and at this point, there's a lot of stuff that's not up there, and I have to write software to make that happen. So I'm glad to have the site back, but I got to move everything around because we have this branding issue to bring about.
All right. You just get to say whatever the hell you want and then excuse it as playing King of the Hill game.
Say that again?
On the .com?
Anywhere. How you get to just say whatever the hell you want and then excuse it as playing King of the Hill game.
Well, you and I just had a really interesting discussion, right? How long have we've been solving this problem for a year, right? At least. Our earlier discussion, right? We worked on it forever, right?
Well, I considered it solved and was just trying to convince you.
I'll let you have it. All right. So
you know, Curt, you know what that old saying, give mouse a cookie?
Yeah.
And
I don't get it.
Like you keep on giving Martin too much. You see too much territory to Martin.
I see too much territory.
You see too much territory.
I don't need to be. I need to get to the right answer. I don't need to be right. It's just my standard of knowing. It pretty much requires first principles, and so my standard of knowing is a lot of burden to carrying it with it. So if I look at this, what are we talking about again?
The curtdoolittle.com site.
Oh, Martin is teasing me. It's because really, I do. That's what I do. I fight, or I agree, or I disagree, or whatever. But it's true. If you want to know what I really think, I mean, I'll answer the question directly. But I mean, if I'm trying to get to the core of something, I'll go at it from every fucking possible angle I can think of. I mean, it's not like I can talk to everybody like I can talk to you, because nobody thinks that deeply, right? And not nobody, but very few people outside of our circle think that deeply. So when you're talking to ordinary people, what you do is what I do, is I provoke some sort of moral outrage, because I know I will get a report, right? A demonstrated interest rather than a reported interest. And so I just do it all the time. And most of that comes up that way. Sometimes I'll make entire arguments, but you've seen me do this. You've been working with me long enough. I'll write a whole argument out, and I'll I just talked myself out of it. Right? So it doesn't. To me, it's just all R&D. I mean, you're right about my Anglo frame for sure. But other than that, I mean, you and I have both gone over to the fascist side on plenty of things, right? I mean, and I look at the left and I'm like, well, they're not wrong that they're fucked, but I say the same thing for the right. The adjutants on the right, they're not wrong that they're screwed. The problem is they're really bad at coming up what to do about it. And even if we do come up with somebody tells them what to do about it, they're so fucking agit-propped that you can't make them think straight about anything. So, anyway.
A lot of them would agree with that themselves.
Yes. All right. Okay, how come I'm doing so much questions? All right, what's the next? This is easy.
All right, so question 5 from Anonymous. I took multiple COVID vaccines. How screwed am I? Was the vaccine a Malthusian plot to reduce population, a botched but earnest attempt to prevent the spread of the disease, or actually safe and effective?
Okay, so we were just talking about my standard of knowing is much higher than that of others. So what I can testify to is that the government was panicking. It was looking for any what is it called, any boat in a storm. I don't know what it was, any
Grasping at straws.
grasping at straws. They wanted to preserve the calm in the populace. And so because, we're conservatives, we're pretty mentally stable, and progressives are just the opposite. They're mentally unstable, which is why they're progressives. So, so they were trying to handle both sides, and they biased it towards the unstables, because the stables will always get through it and the unstables might not. So I saw that happening, and they made deals. They did a pretty good job. You got to credit Trump for this, of mobilizing the fucking industry to find something. And frankly, they found it in like 90 days. Now, the problem we have is the technology. I would say it's the technology itself, right? The problem with this fucking kind of technology is we're finding out it's not like, a more normal vaccine that stays around and then dissipates from your body, or that is just a variation of some other organism that we normally host, and it stays in it, and it's taught your body how to make antibodies to defend itself, which is really the whole idea, right? Take antibodies to defend itself. So they told us some untruths. They said it was a vaccine instead of a therapy, right? They told us that a thing that you cannot not know is safe is safe. The problem was really one of vulnerable populations, not the mass of the population. And we know what those people are. And they were afraid it would look like a minority or an elderly irresponsibility to the minorities or the elderly. And so they were playing this fucking game, which I would say the truth would have served them better. So in the end, it's a really difficult answer. And that is, so I'm going to read what I've written here. Is myocarditis, pericarditis, there is a consensus among medical professionals that a small but increased risk of myocarditis, inflammation of the heart muscle, and pericarditis, inflammation of the tissue surrounding the heart, particularly in young males following these vaccines. And this has been noted by health authorities locally. We don't know if this is a durable problem or an immediate problem, but yes, athletes dropping dead on the court was happening. Thrombosis and thrombocytopenia syndrome, I love medical terms, linked specifically to AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson's virus vaccines. This is a rare condition that involves blood clots combined with low platelet counts. That one was quite scary to me because I saw that as a terrible risk. And then the one that freaked me out was the long fibrous clots. uh, uh, what was I trying to say? I initially felt confidence in this position, though at present I agree with the consensus that we just don't know if these were observations were the result of pre-mortem or post-mortem causality, and whether or not it was due to the vaccine or some other aspect of treatment. I'm going to say that what I see here is a pattern, and that there's something going on in there. Have you? Is it likely you're still carrying something that would harm you? I would say probably not. But we're going to know more over time because there are a lot of people invested in making a career out of figuring this out. So, what was your actual question? I think it was an earnest attempt made by people punching above their weight, trying to solve a problem that is of emotional and political consequence, instead of just saying the fucking truth. We don't know. It's the best we got. If given that we don't know, it's the best we got, and given that you're the most likely person that's going to be affected by it, the choice has to be yours. We would recommend, if you have these things, that you go up and do it. So we leave it up to choice to you. Masks, for example, are a psychological prophylactic. They don't make difference as long as you're not around dirty people and touching your face all the time. So washing your hands was very effective, etc. I mean, that's how I dealt with it. I just went out of the house. I washed up as soon as I got back, and I didn't touch my face. All right. All right.
Well, I've seen all sorts of theories beyond just corruption, stupidity, and credentialism. I don't entirely discount them. I just don't know, but I don't think it was an attempt at depopulation because it just wasn't that deadly.
Yeah, so Martin asked a good question offline. It's like, so I was taking care of my mother, and she's quite unhealthy, right? She had a whole bunch of stuff going on, mostly because she was an ex-smoker. But what happened was she got the shot, and I think 5 days later she was dead, and it had a dramatic negative effect on her. So I'm going to say that the second thing is, I've done my share of embalming, which is probably not something people know, and it's not something I recommend, by the way. And that long fibrous clot thing, if I ever saw that, because that's not what you see even if a body's been around a while, it's not what you see. If you start seeing shit like that, really, I mean, I guess there are other reasons they can form, but that's just not something. That's not something that I would see. So am I an authority? Absolutely not. I'm an epistemologist, and I can tell you exactly what I told you in this conversation. And it looks like, here's what they would say in the final measure, the harm done, in other words, the people that were harmed by the thing is limited, while the potential to save people who are on the margins was very high. Does that make it right? No, because we should have been given the choice, and we weren't given. Too many people weren't given the choice. That's my argument, because they were not able. They could not make an argument that did not leave them liable, and they're liable.
So
all right.
Harms are done. Now it's just a question of restitution, punishment, and prevention.
Well, it's like we've got to get the evidence in clearly enough. But I mean, I would say that as a political move, it was other than Trump's mobilization of the industry, which was fantastic. Every fucking word that came out of everybody at the CDC, the WHO, or our government was complete bullshit. It was just absolute bullshit, and it was exactly what Martin said it was. All right.
All right. Question 6. If you believe in the work of Hans Hermann Hoppe, you are a Hoppian. If you believe in the work of Friedrich Hayek, you are a Hayekian. If you believe in Austrian economics, you're Austrian. If you believe in proprietarianism, you are a proprietarian. If you believe in Curt Doolittle's rendition of natural law, what are you? Still a proprietarian?
Well, the answer is, of course, you could be all of those things, and yes, because in libertarian definition, proprietarianism consists of the reduction of all questions of social science to questions of property. What we use is demonstrated interest because the property definition come up by the Jewish wing is insufficient, and the property definition that came up by the European wing, which would be Hayek's informal property, kind of the informal institutions as property, and my work as informational asset as property. So, because we all depend on them. So these are informational commons and informal commons. So if you get into an Austrian, that just means that you're measuring from the first principles of incentives. Austrian economics is compatible with natural law because essentially that's what it's trying to figure out. It's not trying to figure out what to do with economics. It's, in other words, how to use economic knowledge. It's the Austrian economics is trying to simply say, how do we measure human behavior? If you get to Hoppe, which I think that's really the order should be a little different here. If you get to Hoppe, he's demonstrating, he's expanding on and formalizing the work of Rothbard to show that yes, informal property really is able to, in other words, property is able to solve all questions of social science. Okay, great. So all these things are just the incremental discovery. So I'll go, so aside from the odd use of the term believe in, which I don't like very much, rather than I agree with these things. They're not, those things aren't incompatible. They're just a continuum as we mere humans incrementally solve the problem of social science. As for proprietarianism, yes, proprietarianism consists of the provision of commensurability in behavioral science by the reduction of all questions to that of demonstrated interest, which we consider in our work this correct definition of property. And yes, the natural law is predicated on that reduction. I tend to focus on the natural law today rather than proprietarianism because our work has expanded to cover the unification of all the sciences by provision of universal commensurability. Just as we did universal commensurability in ethics and social science by reduction to property, we've made a similar reduction of all sciences to evolutionary computation, the ternary logic of evolutionary computation. So we have two basic macro reductions, and that way. Our work is expanded to cover the unification of the sciences, and proprietarianism constitutes the first principles of ethics within that broader program. Is there any difference between proprietarian ethics and the natural law of evolutionary computation? No. Proprietarianism is just, or the reduction of ethics to a question of property is just another example of the ternary logic. Martin's going to go on to be funny here now.
We used natural artists as a joke, but after interacting with actual artists, I no longer wish to create that association and consider even my handle an unfortunate choice in retrospect. Anyway, I don't use any of that because I have a problem with ideology as identity. None of what we do is an end for me. Flourishing of our people is my end, and I simply see involvement here as a means to that end. Nor do I tie myself to some dogmatic interpretation, but constantly make adjustments as my understanding increases, and comes in large part from listening to people not themselves involved with us.
Yes, very smart. As we all should. Very well done.
Well, I want to ask a question. So, and this came up because whenever I talk to people unfamiliar with our work about Natural Law Institute, naturally their ask is, are you guys associated with the Natural Law Party? Which is something totally different. So, Curt,
Yeah.
did you, when you did the rebranding, did you choose this name specifically because there is a Natural Law Party, or it just kind of ended up that way?
I chose it because I wanted us to be associated with political reform and not with philosophy. In other words, I felt like we needed to be disassociated from philosophy, and we need to be more associated with science and jurisprudence. And so I chose that. And the second reason I chose it is I'm just trying to show the evolution of at least my work, our work, is a result of Aristotle, Aquinas, the founders, and us, right? And so I believe the result is just one more evolutionary step in the long effort for the past couple of thousand years to develop a science of cooperation.
Natural law has been used like in 100 different ways, probably more. Everyone wants it to justify their own ideology, especially libertarians.
So
We
I couldn't. So I would rather fight that problem than fight the ideology problem. In other words, I don't want to be called a philosophy or an ideology. It's not. It's a system of measurement. We can, from it, decide to make choices, but essentially, it's a system of measurement. And so when I look at it, I'm like, we're having too many people, and we're having too much discourse with people who are what I consider amateurish, and we're not having discourse with people who actually have the power to bring about change. And so by taking the natural law position, I felt it was the safest place between both. We could have just picked a random name, but I felt like every argument we have about what natural law means is, and what we do is informs people. So I'm saying we're in this flow of the natural law, and consistent with the founders, with Aquinas, with Aristotle, with the scholastics.
All right, shall we move on?
Yep.
So I'll read out the next question, then I need to step away for a couple of minutes. So question 7, consider the fact that all things are able to evolve from something simple into something highly complex and adaptive over time. What are some ways to impose adaptation or evolution on a given population?
Eric, you want to go first? Martin, you want me to?
Okay. Well, evolution happens regardless of what we do. What you mean is how to ensure it's in the desirable direction. This is technically what eugenics means, but we're left with deciding what the desirable direction is and how to go about it. We propose only negative eugenics, which is to say removing obvious undesirables that cost the group much more than they benefit, such as repeat criminals whom we execute, or people with physical and mental defects that make them useless, whom we take care of but ensure they can do no harm and don't reproduce. Otherwise, thinking we can be certain what humans need to adapt to as if we could completely predict the future is hubris.
How come you write better, so much better than the average American, even the most educated Americans? Yeah, Martin's right here. This is really quite good. So I would say that that's a good question. What are some of the ways to impose evolution on a given population? Law, eugenics, indoctrination into metaphysical premises, whether environmental or institutional. Education and means of calculation, which is writing, math, reason, physical sciences, engineering, natural law, economics, and treasures. Everything you do that causes people to sort, um, but especially the positive, right? But then everything you can do to remove people, law and eugenics, you should do. I've said this before. I know how it sounds, and I know how it makes people feel. But the failure of the eugenics program, because the activism against it post-war, because the Nazis, that was a catastrophic failure for mankind, and we're paying for it terribly. Law that doesn't eliminate behavior is again something that doesn't put people out of the circulation. Right, and one of the problems is we've let crazy people onto the streets, and we've let criminals onto the streets, and we're not holding them like we used to hold them, and isolating the population from their harms. It makes a difference. All right, so that's my answer.
Small issue with the question I've just noticed. It's not at all evident that all things are able to evolve from something simple into something complex. We took a very specific path, and it's not clear that there are many other paths. Like,
right.
many simple things will necessarily stay simple because there's no way for them to improve.
That's right.
Complex.
That's right. And by the way, I was just like, I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole. Martin, why did Rome fall?
Various factors feeding into each other, and of sense of duty, different classes to each other, increase in rent-seeking and corruption, decrease in responsibility, native birthrights, integration and enfranchisement of foreigners. People blame Christianity, but I see that more as a symptom, one that gained foothold after the old religion was long dead, killed by philosophers and cosmopolitanism. It's all the same things we see happening today.
Yep. I think the plague goes in there.
The Justinian plague?
The plagues go in there, but yeah. Otherwise, Martin, yeah, he's right on.
So, in other words, institution decay.
Say again?
In other words, institutional decay.
Yeah, well, I mean, writing a fucking book on it, I suppose we should. We're writing a book on it. The basic way we describe this in the book is the institutions of regulation of behaviors as the relations between people become more distant or the power distance becomes higher, right? Mm-hmm. Gives too much opportunity for the emergence of lawlessness, right? In other words, and so most lawlessness is the product of elites. Elites, in other words, people in the government or
rent seeking.
And so most of the time, their rent seeking exceeds the population's capacity to tolerate it, but there is no means other than revolution or war to adapt it. So, there's no, it doesn't correct very easily. You have to, as a matter of fact, most of the time, you get corrections is after wars.
Speaking of which, the first part of your presentation on this topic should be coming out shortly.
Woohoo!
I think Mike Hudson wrote a book about rent-seeking in the ancient era and its consequences.
Who did?
Hmm?
Who wrote the book?
Michael Hudson.
Ah. Well, the more things change, the more things remain the same.
It's really disturbing because you start on this, and of course you pull together all the examples through all out history, and just you delve into each of them, and it's the same fucking thing every time, the same every single time. And so it's important about our work is that and I handled this, and I'm going to have to go back and find it. But I handled this in one of our discussions the other day. Is that so? How do you measure? How do you measure rent seeking? How do you detect it? You need criteria for it. Turns out you can develop that criteria. I can't do it off the top of my head because I have having some sort of allergic reaction right now. I don't understand. But
doesn't it just boil down to one or multiple violations of reciprocity?
Mostly that it's unproductive.
It's almost never fully informed.
yeah,
They cannot warranty against the imposition of costs on others.
I think the big one is that you can't fund or facilitate. You can't fund, facilitate, or encourage the abandonment of responsibility by anyone. In other words, that's the policy problem. That's the Doge issue, the government's issue, is they're trying to remove it. The second thing is, of course, paying off, right? Paying people off to buy their influence or whatever. Those two are the selfish and the external ways that crime is committed. So I made a list of 3 things, can't roll off the top of my head, which can inhibit the growth of parasitism, but it's going to be a very hard problem over time to get to prevent the reemergence of grift. It's just going to be very hard.
But not impossible.
No, that's the problem. I keep telling you, your law is never done, right? As long as humans are innovative, they're going to innovate new ways of scamming other humans. What's that face mean, Francis?
I'm laughing at this. I'm just thinking that does that mean we as a species fucked?
Well, I mean, we've come a long way, really. It might just be that it's just rational. If you have enough wealth to have choices, and you have enough, let's say, law and incentives to limit those choices, you should be able to say, well, eventually people will reach a point where it's quite difficult to engage in rent seeking. But it's going to be an ongoing fucking battle because humans are what the humans are. All right.
To have a leader who has no incentive to let that keep going.
Say again, brother?
It helps to have a monarch who has no incentive to let that scam keep going.
Yes. Which is why we need monarchs. All right, I like this next one, Martin. Okay, who asked this kind of question?
No idea. The person didn't say.
Everyone throughout history has asked this question.
Isn't the answer just 42 or something?
Well, Martin's response is brilliant.
What is the meaning of life?
So the meaning of I said there isn't any meaning of it. You can search for meaning, but intrinsically, is there any? There can't be. There's no intentionality to the universe because that's what meaning means. Right? There's no only random calculations of feet of entropy as a means of alleviating the internal pressures of the universe. Instead, there exists only an opportunity for you to produce meaning yourself during life, and perhaps meaning that persists in the world as a consequence afterward. Now, Martin's criticism is quite correct.
So Logpo from the chat, Logpo says it was him who asked the question. Well asked.
What?
Yeah, but a user by the name of Logpo, Logpo. He asked the question.
I call Curt's view here primitive materialism. It is, of course, on a certain level of analysis true, but physical analysis for metaphysical questions can only give us a nihilistic answer like this. In a literal sense, meaning is our interpretation, how we make sense of a given thing. but the term meaning of life is more specific and concerns the purpose of our existence. Purpose is what defines our form. We have a human form so that we can do what the humans are supposed to do. But whereas most animals don't need to ponder what their purpose is and just do it, humans are intelligent social animals and need a story that defines their group membership, their place in the group, their role to play, and the system of measurement for how well they're performing it. Agentic families likewise even have a more specific family strategy. Functional regimes are the ones that allow people to perform their role and reward them for it, not the ones that let them do whatever they want without instruction. So my suggestion would be that if the meaning of your life hasn't been made clear to you, it's because your group strategy has been stolen from you. Motives for doing that are clear. Humans without group strategy, without human purpose, go back to being mere animals and make perfect labor and perfect customers, having no aspirations beyond hedonism. Exactly the kind of humans merchants need.
Fucking brilliant, Martin. That is brilliant. Yes. Kind of harsh, Martin, but yeah. I can't add to it. It's correct. I want to embellish on it because I want to make it memorable. But I mean, that part in the middle is those few sentences in the middle. They're quotable. It is true. Does it have to be within my group strategy, Martin? I suppose it has to be within it. Yes, it has to be within it. Okay.
It has to be within some group strategy.
It's very rare individual who can find their own meaning. That doesn't work for most people because we are social animals.
Yes. I have.
Let me think about that for a second. Would you say that the Unabomber had meaning in his life? Did he find meaning in life? And if so, what group evolutionary strategy was he a member of?
I don't think he was acting on a group strategy exactly.
But did he have meaning in life? I think the answer to that is yes.
I guess.
I would do it this way.
Really see so what he was doing as important.
So I'm trying to test against your theory there. So Curt?
Why, did you just ask me a question or no? Or did you?
No, I'm just telling Martin the reason I said the Unabomber is because I'm trying to poke holes in Martin's thesis.
Well, Unabomber wasn't exactly typical.
So let's take I'll take the neurological approach. The human brain is a prediction engine.
Mm-hmm. We
can predict extraordinary things over extraordinary periods of time, extraordinary complexity. The problem is that we heavily rely on things that are predictable and rules that are consistent.
Sure.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we have a lot to. So this is what I would say. Well, Martin's group strategy that would be included as the foundation of whatever network you're working in. It would have to be. So you have all these things that you're dependent upon. Now, if you don't have those things, how do you make choices? If you can't make choices, how do you get a positive or negative signal for anything other than hedonism? You can't. There's nothing. In other words, you don't. How do you even plan your life out if nothing has what we would call meaning? But what it means is there's no return on our actions,
mm-hmm.
even if it's just psychological return, because then your existence is pointless. To some degree, you can't even think.
You get reduced back to the animal status.
Which is what he
Just living
said.
in the so-called living in the present. No wonder chicks like that so much.
There is evidence that men who are no longer needed die sooner.
Yeah. So what's the difference between what I said, which is the one needs to find meaning in life, and what is the meaning of life? The difference is one's the universal, and I'm like, there's no, what is, and that's what I answered, and I'm like, well, but what good does that do us? There's no.
I mean, I think the difference is there's no one right answer, right? What is the meaning of life implies that there is a universal meaning in life, and one of the core, you could call it even first principles of the institute here is as long as we prohibit the bad, you're free to pursue the good on your own means.
I mean, if you wanted to look for the meaning of life, the purpose of life, it's each person is a probabilistic risk of continuing the population by better or worse means. That's all it means. That's all. That's the meaning. But that doesn't. That's like, well, that doesn't tell me anything about what to do with my mind. So, and it's also anthropomorphizing. There's no meaning in the universe because there's no mind to say that to be able to do what we do. So we could say, what's the function of the universe? We could say, what's the purpose? We could say, what's the meaning? But the only one is function that really works is function. The other two things require intention. So there's a function of the universe. There's a function of life, right? But if you want to say what's the purpose of it, the purpose of life is the only purpose I know of life is to find find a purpose in life that makes use of the opportunity you've been given.
But aren't purpose and function really synonyms?
Well, I mean, go down. A purpose requires an intention. A function does not.
Oh, the function of life is it's to engage in evolutionary computation.
Right, that's it. That's all it is.
Doesn't tell me anything. Everything is evolutionary computation.
Well, but that's the point.
That's
it. That's all it means. When you talk about it as an objective observer, that's all it means. When you talk about it as I'm an individual, I'm not a statistical anomaly. I have a mind. I have a choice. I ask questions like, "What's the meaning?" And the meaning. In other words, what's the meaning? I think what a person is saying is, "I have not yet found one." That's what asking the question means. They haven't found one, or
I haven't been provided with one.
Or what?
Or I haven't been provided with one, as I should have been.
That's even better. So, one has to obtain meaning by either being direct or given it, right? By choosing it, or by falling into it, or by not getting it and basically being miserable. Anything else, Martin? You got anything else on that one? I don't have anything else.
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, I think we may be able to hit a record in terms of number of questions answered. Question 10, Herbert Spencer, based or cringe?
I'm like really curious. Some of the times I see these and I'm like, I understand curiosity about Spencer, but I don't really understand why you would say based or cringe. I don't get it. Martin, do you have any idea?
It's sort of equivalent of right wing or left wing, but really he was on the right track, I guess.
Oh, I see.
I haven't read him, but I saw that he was trying this sort of universal framework, that we've arrived at with evolutionary computation. It's called Wilsonian synthesis, but he was trying earlier.
Yes.
But I'd have to read him to decide what he was right and wrong about.
Okay, so for the audience who does know or doesn't, Spencer was born in the early 1800s and died just after 1900. He was a Darwinian. In other words, he's the first of the social scientists not to take a moral position, but to take a Darwinian position. And so the left hates him today for his use of what is it called? Social
Survival of
Darwin.
the fittest.
Well, yeah, but it applied to social, but the fucking truth is it's true. It's just why people don't want people want to deny it. He was in social science and social policy. He was against government meddling and saying that things should work out about evolutionary processes with some encouragement, but we should not attempt to engineer mankind's society. He was right in both of those things. The problem is he used essentially pure logic to come to his conclusions. But if you read his stuff, he was trying to unify biology, psychology, and society using evolutionary principles the same way we're trying to unify everything using evolutionary principles. So he produced a systematic, he's absolutely worth a read. So I think that he's just a natural, he's the social consequence of Darwin. And I think that it's important to realize he was very famous in his time. It was only in the post-war period they tried to make him go away, and they developed all these critiques of him. He was very much very popular and very well understood. So I think he's based as hell. Actually, he's absolutely based as hell. I don't know where you get cringe from. There's nothing in there to be cringe about. I don't get it.
My problem, and I don't know if that was his case, but with certain examples of social Darwinism is that it pushes individuals in competition with each other, which is not at all how we've evolved, but as competing tribes of kin, which internally cooperate.
Well, he's under urbanization, right? So he's there during the Industrial Revolution. So he's there during Kant, and not he's during what's his name, Marx, and during Darwin. And you get Marx, Darwin, and Spencer out of that process. And you get Maxwell. You got a lot going on there. So I would say that his view of society was more urbanized. And I'm trying to say is, therefore, are you correct? I would say, I think that during the Industrial Revolution, people saw people as becoming competitors. I think that's true. Anyway.
That can make society weaker to a group that still maintains that cooperation.
Yeah, the word we use in economics is cooperation, right, or some variation of it out. We even cooperate by competing. So I don't see this. I don't know what I would be arguing against. But anyway, I think he's based.
When you prioritize giving opportunities to each other, don't steal them from each other. Help each other when needed.
Yeah, but at some point you get defectors. That's the problem with scale. Then you're back to competition. All right, so I don't have anything else to say about Mr. Spencer. it's about time to shut down our episode.
I think we can actually do one more because the next one you already have a Twitter answer to. I can just read it.
Please.
I'm gonna note the time and I'll move it over here so it's actually captured. All right, so the question was, please deliberate. How will the Supreme Court rule on Trump's executive order to ban birthright citizenship? And Curt already posted a reply on Twitter. Will Trump's clarification of birthright citizenship prevail in the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court's ruling would depend on several legal arguments, interpretation of the 14th Amendment, and the composition of the court at the time of the ruling. Arguments favoring Trump's position. Originalist interpretation of the 14th Amendment. The citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment states, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. The phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof has historically been interpreted broadly to include nearly everyone born on U.S. soil, except diplomats and invading armies. Trump's argument hinges on a narrow interpretation that subject to the jurisdiction means full allegiance to the U.S., which could conclude illegal immigrants and non-permanent residents. Historical precedents and legislative intent. The framer of the 14th Amendment, 1868, debated whether birthright citizenship should extend beyond freed slaves to include Native Americans and foreigners. Some legal scholars argue that the intent was not to automatically grant citizenship to children of non-citizens. The Supreme Court has never ruled explicitly on whether illegal immigrants' children qualify for birthright citizenship. In United States versus Wong Kim Ark, 1898, not a perfect precedent, this case ruled that a child born in the U.S. to legal Chinese immigrants was a citizen. It did not explicitly address children of illegal immigrants, leaving an open legal question. Conservatives could argue that the ruling was based on a different immigration context before modern border laws and mass immigration. The role of Congress in immigration. The plenary power doctrine states that the Congress has wide latitude over immigration policy. Some legal conservatives argue that Congress and not the courts should decide birthright citizenship laws, meaning an executive order could trigger legislative action. Composition of the Supreme Court. If the court leans conservative 6-3, they might be open to revisit Wong Kim Ark or upholding a redefinition of the jurisdiction clause. Justices like Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch may be sympathetic to an originalist reading that limits birthright citizenship. Arguments against Trump's position. Wong Kim Ark precedent and stare decisis?
Stare decisis.
Stare decisis. The court has long recognized birthright citizenship as settled law. Overturning it would require a radical reinterpretation of jurisdiction. And textual reading of the 14th Amendment. The broad language suggests inclusion rather than exclusion. The framers did not explicitly exclude children of foreigners. Practical and political fallout. Ending birthright citizenship could disrupt millions of legal cases. It might lead to stateless children violating international norms. And possible Supreme Court ruling outcomes. Trump wins, 5-4 or 6-3 ruling. The court limits birthright citizenship by redefining subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Children of legal immigrants or temporary visitors lose automatic citizenship. Wong Kim Ark remains precedent for legal immigrants only. Trump loses, 6-3 or 7-2 ruling. The court reaffirms birthright citizenship under Wong Kim Ark. They reject the executive order as an overreach requiring constitutional amendment. Partial victory, narrow ruling. The court sidesteps broad rulings and focus on congressional authority over the matter. They rule that Congress, not an executive order, must clarify the law. Prediction 50-50 odds. If the case is heard by this current court, Trump has a real chance of winning, but it depends on whether conservative justices view Wong Kim Ark as binding precedent. A textualist like Barrett might hesitate to overturn settled law. If the ruling leans against Trump, expect it to be based on stare decisis, respect for precedent, rather than constitutional clarity. If the case were postponed until after a more conservative court, due to retirement or new appointments, Trump's odds increase significantly. Well, I'll just comment that the more I learn, the more I find it frustrating that prior laws are written in such imprecise language that can be
Yes.
interpreted so many different ways.
Yes.
It blows my mind. Like, how could people be that stupid?
Yes, it's extremely frustrating. But when I've talked to, I can't tell you how many lawyers I've talked to about precise language that eschew it, because they actually are less afraid of having to debate the matter, right, than they are of a narrow composition.
But you just follow the money, because they make a living on debating.
I wasn't even going there. I was just assuming that they would say, it's great if I get to debate it, but if I make the ruling this precise, if I make the legislation this precise, I don't know what is going to come out of it. In other words, they don't feel confident they can anticipate all the consequences of a greater precision, whereas they feel confident they can handle the debate if it comes along. And this isn't an insane argument, but we have to realize that we have, us in particular, our group in particular, but the world in general has a lot more knowledge than it had in the late 1800s or early 1900s, and far more knowledge than we had in the late 1700s. So it's the fact that we see these things as incomplete laws might possibly be a result of the fact that, well, we just have a sufficient precision in our understanding today, and they didn't in the past, and it's just our duty to update them. That's why I don't particularly like it, but that's why the congressional ruling is often the answer, which is it needs to go back to Congress because we don't want to rule on this. In this case, I think they want to rule on it because it's essentially constitutional. It's effectively a constitutional derivation. And so I think they need to rule on it because the Congress can rule on fashions, but the court can't. It has to rule on absolutes. And they have been happy to overturn stare decisis if it's a matter that has led to conflict, like the one where conflict we're having. So I think they'll try to solve the conflict. That's my gut. All right, we have done our duty today.
Yes, very well. We've set a new record.
I was going to say, was that a new record? I think
that is a new record. I don't think we ever gone above 10. Usually average about 6.
All right, everyone, do your thing, Francis. Or is it me? Oh, it's me. Oh, wait, I do the thing.
You do the thing.
It's okay. So Brad, during Brad's section, he does the closing thing. But here I do. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. That's 10 questions we got through, or 11 questions we got through. A new record. This is Francis, Martin, and Curt for the Natural Law Institute. This is our office hours Q&A. You'll find a link to submitting questions below in the what's it called in the
YouTube comments.
In the YouTube comments, we'll tell you where to submit the questions. Fill out a really simple form. We're good. Don't even have to tell us who you are. I don't think, do you?
No, I mean it's optional.
We like it though, because then we can ask you if we don't understand something. All right. Next is 2 weeks from now. Is that what it is?
Yeah. Now I'm gonna channel Dr. Brad. Hit like, subscribe, ring the bell.
Yes, thank you very much. All right. You got anything to say, Martin?
No.
No. Martin's a perfect judge, says the fewest words possible. All right. Love you guys. Love the audience. Thanks for the great questions. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.